Hello, and a very warm welcome to everyone joining us today for this roundtable discussion. I'm Charlotte Burrows, Chair of the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this important roundtable discussion of the issues facing Black pregnant and parenting workers. To offer a more inclusive experience for everyone, including those who can't see me, I'll give a brief visual description of myself. I'm a Black woman. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm wearing a bright red jacket. Another accessibility feature of today's event is closed captioning, which you may access by selecting the multimedia viewer in the right-hand portion of your screen. So today's roundtable is being recorded and attendees will receive an email when the recording is available. I'm joined today by my esteemed colleagues, the Principal Deputy Administrator, Jessica Lumen, of the department's Wage and Hour Division, as well as Director Chindi Young-hoon, who leads the Women's Bureau at the Department of Labor. Our agencies have been working together to raise awareness of the laws and protections for pregnant and parenting workers. This is Black Maternal Health Week, so we are glad to be joined by three people with deep knowledge of how pregnancy impacts Black workers in particular. So Clark Wheeler of Black Mamas Matter Alliance is here, along with Megan Simmons of the National Birth Equity Collaborative, and Cameron Dawson from A Better Balance. Welcome to all of you. And at the EEOC, we enforce the federal laws against employment discrimination, including Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits sex discrimination, as well as the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, which made clear that sex discrimination includes discrimination based on pregnancy, childbirth, and related medical conditions, as well as the Americans with Disabilities Act, which provides important protections for those who experience medical conditions related to their pregnancies. And I'm excited to add that beginning June 27th, 2023, the EEOC will also begin enforcing the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, which Congress enacted last year to ensure that pregnant workers can receive needed accommodations on the job. Together, these laws provide significant workplace protections for workers before they become pregnant, during their pregnancies, and as caregivers. Too often, workers, especially new parents, don't know how these laws apply to their circumstances. And so that's why the EEOC engages in significant outreach and enforcement efforts, together with other federal agencies like the Wage and Hour Division and the Women's Bureau, to protect the rights of pregnant and parenting workers. I'd now like to turn it over to Principal Deputy Administrator of the Wage and Hour Division here at DOL, Jessica Lumen, for introductory remarks.
Thank you so much, Chair Burrows. Really appreciate it. So glad to be here. As you said, I'm the Principal Deputy Administrator of the Wage and Hour Division here at the U.S. Department of Labor. I am a white woman with straight blonde hair, wearing a white shirt and a light blue jacket. My preferred pronouns are she and her. And as you may know, the Wage and Hour Division is responsible for enforcing some of the nation's most just foundational federal worker protection laws, including minimum wage and overtime and child labor, and protections for taking job-protected parental leave from work, and the right to pump breast milk at work. At the Wage and Hour Division, our mission is to promote and achieve compliance with labor standards to protect and enhance the welfare of the nation's workforce. Or to put it more simply, to make sure working people in the U.S. receive the protections they've earned and that their work is respected. The laws we enforce cover about 165 million workers at 11 million workplaces across the country, and we are committed to equity. And I am so delighted to be here for this important multi-agency conversation on Black maternal health, and we really look forward to hearing from our panelists. So with that, I will turn it over to my colleague Wendy to introduce herself.
Thanks, Jessica. Hi, everyone. I'm Wendy Chun-hoon. I use she and her pronouns. I direct the Women's Bureau at the U.S. Department of Labor. I have brown and gray hair. I'm wearing clear glasses, and I have a green sweater on today. And I'm Chinese American. So the Women's Bureau, a little bit about us. We're a 102-year-old agency within the Department of Labor, And we are laser focused on the needs of working women. We do our work through a combination of talking with folks across the country, really calling attention to data and policies that impact women. And we also run grants programs to really support and spur innovation and reform, including our current grant program, which is called Fostering Access, Rights, and Equity, which supports community groups' work to really ensure workers know and can access their rights in the workplace, like we're talking about today. I'll share data show that Black women have higher labor force participation rates, are more likely to work full-time, are also less likely than white or Latina mothers to reduce their paid work hours when they have children. And so the reason we're here today, Black women have the worst maternal health outcomes, the highest maternal mortality rates, and recent studies show that negative health outcomes persist for Black women regardless of wealth. So we are also honored to co-host this webinar today and really dig in to some of these barriers and solutions to Black women's maternal health. And with that, Clark, I'll hand it over to you.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Clark Wheeler. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the Federal Policy Manager at Black Mamas Matter Alliance. I am a Black woman with Black hair and a low bun and wearing a gray turtleneck. So thank you so much to the event organizers, panelists, and audience members for coming together to have this important conversation. For those of you who don't know, Black Mamas Matter Alliance is a national network of Black women-led organizations and multidisciplinary professionals who work to ensure that all Black mamas have the rights, respect, and resources to thrive before, during, and after pregnancy. We provide technical assistance, training and capacity building for grassroots organizations, maternity care service providers, for example, clinicians, midwives, doula networks, and community health workers, as well as academia and the public health industry overall. I'm so glad to be having this important conversation on the first day of the 6th annual Black Maternal Health Week, a week founded by Black Mamas Matter Alliance in 2018. And now I'll pass it over to Cameron.
Thank you so much, Clark, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Cameron Dawson, and I'm a senior staff attorney here in Nashville, Tennessee with A Better Balance. And A Better Balance is a legal advocacy organization that uses the power of the law through direct services, policy advocacy, outreach, and litigation to advance justice for workers nationwide so that they can care for themselves and their loved ones without jeopardizing their economic security. My pronouns are she and her, and today I'm wearing a brown blazer with a white shirt, and I am a Black woman with dark brown braids. And I really want to thank everyone for joining today and having this conversation, and just want to share more about A Better Balance and our expert legal team that combats discrimination against pregnant workers and caregivers and advances supportive work-family policies like pregnancy accommodations, paid sick time, and paid family and medical leave. And so in order to help support mothers and caregivers in America, we also run a national free and confidential legal helpline that helps workers understand and assert their rights in the workplace. And we engage in extensive outreach and education efforts throughout the country to make sure that the hard-fought protections we are winning are meaningfully enforced. And so I'm really happy to join this conversation with my colleagues and welcome any questions you all have. And I'm going to pass it over to Megan Simmons.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Megan Simmons. I am the policy director at the National Birth Equity Collaborative. My pronouns are she, her, hers. Today I'm wearing a black and white shirt with green glasses, and my hair is back. And I'm a Black woman. The National Birth Equity Collaborative is an organization wherein we collaborate through research, policy, technical assistance to support Black maternal health as well as reproductive rights. I am so excited to be joining the conversation with everyone today and looking forward to engaging my colleagues in this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. I appreciate that introduction, that framing. Part of EEOC's role as an enforcement agency is really to receive complaints of workplace discrimination and investigate those allegations. And so where we find reasonable cause that discrimination occurred, we are ready and able to work to remedy those violations. In fiscal year 2021, just for context, we received more than 60,000 complaints of workplace discrimination. Over 1/3 of those charges were based on race, and around 30% of them were based on sex. But we also know that many people do not complain to the EEOC. In fact, some studies show that 1 in 4 Black and Hispanic workers who experience race discrimination or national origin discrimination do not report, while 42% of women report having experienced sex discrimination, and making it likely that Black women will experience some discrimination, unfortunately, during their working careers. So Clark, what do we know about how workplace discrimination generally impacts the health of Black women?
Thank you so much for that question. And again, this is Clark Wheeler from Black Mamas Matter Alliance speaking. So at Black Mamas Matter Alliance, one of our core values is that we recognize intersectional oppression. Specifically, we recognize that people live at the intersections of race, gender, and class, and experience multiple forms of discrimination as a result of their individual context. So when it comes to workplace discrimination, we know that racism, sexism, and intersecting oppressive forces have specific impacts on Black women. They may include unequal pay, denial of paid family leave or sick leave, hair discrimination, pregnancy discrimination, and then other forms of discrimination. Workplace discrimination negatively impacts Black women's health in 2 major ways. So first, workplace discrimination can perpetuate chronic stress caused by racism and other intersecting oppressions. And as we know, chronic stress can lead to a number of negative health outcomes. Another major way is that it prevents Black women from accessing the healthcare, wellness activities, and rest that they need to preserve their health and well-being. So taken together, workplace discrimination is both causing negative health outcomes associated with stress, and it's preventing Black women from accessing the healthcare they need to improve their health outcomes. Also, we know that these dynamics are broadly rooted in a history of Black women's labor exploitation, from slavery to Jim Crow era racial subjugation to the present day. Historically, Black women have been forced to work at significantly higher rates than their counterparts and subjected to workplace discrimination and mistreatment. And this has been and continues to be detrimental to Black women's health, as well as their overall safety and human dignity. So understanding this historical context, as well as committing to centering the experiences of Black women and birthing people, can help us to advance meaningful solutions when it comes to ending workplace discrimination, as well as advancing Black women and birthing people's health overall. So I'll pass it over to Megan.
Thanks so much, Clark. And thanks so much for the question. This is Megan. My responses are pretty similar to Clark's. She named quite a few examples that I would certainly agree with. I think it's really important to acknowledge institutional racism that Black women are essentially born into. It dictates your quality of education, healthy food options, housing. These intersectional structures and the discrimination of that Black women face when they encounter them can't really be divorced. Can't be divorced from where they land in as it relates to the professional environment, assumptions that are made based on implicit bias, and how Black women show up in the workplace and how they're treated based on assumptions about them culturally. We also know that many Black women during the pandemic and on until now have had, again, some the option to work from home remotely, and some have reported that they like it. They have enjoyed that because it kind of shields them from some of the micro aggressions that they have experienced in the workplace consistently. Also, we know that workplace discrimination impacts our career trajectory and wages. Thus, medical benefits and contributions to things like flexible spending accounts, essentially contributions that folks can make to their health. And so just in closing, I think that there's been, it impacts your mental health as well as your physical health, and it also impacts the benefits that you may take advantage of in the workplace. Thank you.
Thank you both for sharing those thoughts and perspectives. We definitely see some of those issues in our work at the EEOC. I'll turn it now to Jessica Lumen to join us in this conversation and talk some about the wage and hour issues.
Thank you, Chair Burrows. And again, I agree that the insight and perspective is incredibly important. And we want to be clear that we understand that there are disparities in Black maternal health outcomes, and those are seen up and down the income ladder based on a lot of the reasons that you were just discussing. But as the Wage and Hour Division, we're an enforcement agency that specifically seeks to strategically deploy our limited resources. So in the Wage and Hour Division, we specifically focus on the low-wage vulnerable workers, where we know there are more likely to be wage and hour violations. But as we continue to think about, why Black women, as you just discussed, remain overrepresented in low-wage jobs, what do we know, if anything, about how low-wage work generally impacts the health of Black women, and particularly the health of Black mothers? So that's sort of my question. How do we know, what's the correlation between low-wage work and those health impacts? And I'm going to start, if it's okay, I'm going to start with Megan.
Thanks so much. This is Megan. So we know that, or studies have shown that Black women essentially over-index in low-wage work. And oftentimes those jobs are not associated or have medical benefits. So what'll happen is folks will generally go to the doctor when they have concerns, but it's when those concerns are exacerbated. And oftentimes when you don't have medical benefits, you don't engage in things like preventative care. And so you find that folks are, it's not a proactive type of situation. It lends itself to folks showing up in doctors' offices when their medical concerns have, become worse than they necessarily had to be. So essentially, you find yourself in a situation where maybe you were sick and it could have been prevented, or perhaps you were sick and it didn't have to get as bad as it actually did, which causes you and your doctor to have to take some extreme measures to preserve your health.
And Jessica, I'll just add too, on top of what Megan has said, we often find that low wage work can be physically demanding. There are often times where their job duties require prolonged standing, continuous movements that can be strenuous on the body. And they have inflexible and inconsistent work schedules that can really compound the adverse health effects that many Black mothers face, including having pregnancy-related complications like preeclampsia, preterm birth, and even death. And what research has shown is that many full-time workers in low-wage jobs are not allowed to have the flexibility when it comes to things like taking breaks, their starting and quitting times, or even their schedule in general. Many workers share that they've found out their schedule, a day or two before their shift starts, and that can really negatively impact Black mothers' ability to have access to childcare or to go to prenatal appointments or postnatal appointments. And I will just share that at the time of A Better Balance's founding, we really were not having conversations about work-family balance. And they were conversations around professional, high-income earning women, ignoring the experiences of low-wage working women, particularly women of color. And so I'm really appreciative that we're focusing this conversation on how, health can really be impacted for low-wage workers. And A Better Balance was founded in part to correct for this and to make sure that a better balance could essentially be achievable for all workers, and that they could care for themselves and their loved ones without risking their economic security. And so, from our helpline, we have heard from workers like Ciadria, who requested a lifting restriction during her pregnancy at a warehouse, and her supervisor continuously ignored her request and routinely instructed her to handle what could be up to 45-pound boxes at a time. And one day, after a long shift of handling these heavier boxes, Ciadria unfortunately miscarried. And she told us, while advocating for the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, that this was going to be her first. This was going to be her first child. And she really, was heartbroken that her pleas for an accommodation were ignored by her workplace. And unfortunately, Ciadria's experiences are not placed in a vacuum, but part of a larger, more systemic issue where Black women are continuously facing both race and sex discrimination at work. And they're often unsupportive and in these abusive workplaces that are low-wage workplaces. So we tried to, really highlight these issues in an op-ed in the New York Times in 2012, which our co-founder and co-president Dina Bax wrote. And it really did highlight the issues that many women like Ciadria face and urge lawmakers to make a clear right for accommodations that we're happy that the EEOC will enforce later this year.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Cameron. I really appreciate that sort of insight and, the terrible, tragic story, which just continues to reiterate that, economic disparities also result in health outcome disparities, and that really does impact low-wage vulnerable workers the most. So thank you so much for that insight. I'm going to turn it to Wendy to ask another question. Wendy?
Thanks, Jessica. It's Wendy, and I actually want to go back up to what I think it was Clark and Megan, you were sharing at the top, just about the impact of institutionalized racism and really living at the intersection of being Black and being women and being paid low wages. And just ask very plainly, how do we need to be thinking about workplace policies within this constellation of what we call social determinants of health, but really is simply, the conditions into which we're born, in which we grow up, in which we live, work, and also age. So Clark, maybe I could ask you to respond first.
Sure. Thank you so much for that question. Again, this is Clark Wheeler from Black Mamas Matter Alliance speaking. So also thank you, Wendy, for defining that concept for folks who are less familiar with social determinants of health. The social determinants of health framework asserts that these conditions of, where people are born, grow, live, work, and age, they play an outsized role in determining health outcomes and contribute to health inequities. In other words, the framework is effectively shifting the focus from individual health behaviors to systemic and structural forces. So in the context of Black women's health and Black maternal health, this framework is useful because it critiques the personal responsibility narratives that have historically been used to blame Black women and birthing people for their health outcomes. For example, if and when Black women and birthing people experience adverse health outcomes, their health conditions and behaviors are often cited as the cause of the problem, rather than looking into the role that racism, sexism, and workplace discrimination plays on the person's health outcomes. Black women and birthing people are frequently told to take better care of themselves throughout pregnancy and postpartum. So that might look like being told to eat healthy foods, get enough sleep, get adequate exercise, de-stress, etc. All of which may be extremely difficult to impossible to achieve, given the wide range of constraints that Black pregnant and postpartum people may be facing, including from their workplaces. So in addition to workplace policies, the constellation of social determinants of health includes things like housing, safety net programs, the natural and built environment, food access, including human milk feeding and infant formula, and other factors such as health education and empowerment, as well as community and social wellness. And so thinking about workplace policies within this broader constellation of social determinants of health is useful in its own right, but it's just particularly useful when considering the broader context of Black women and birthing people's lives, given the ways personal responsibility and blame narratives have historically been projected onto Black women and birthing people. So now I'll pass it over to Cameron.
Thanks so much, Clark. And I will just say too that, we can no longer just ignore the role that the workplace plays in the mental and physical health of workers and the quality of life they experience. As many have, may have seen that oftentimes workplaces with the lack of supportive policies and limited protections under federal and state law can actually create a chilling effect for many low wage workers who are fearful of losing their jobs if they try to raise concerns around health and safety in the workplace. And so seeing how we can address and end the Black maternal mortality crisis in America does include addressing those social, political, economic, and healthcare systems that do reinforce that inequity in our country. And that's why we really did call for legislative change and led the fight for the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act at A Better Balance, because we saw that over a decade ago, these gaps in the law were leaving too many women, especially women of color, out without protections, and either force them to quit their jobs or leave their jobs, or force them to risk their health by working without accommodations. And so laws like the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act and the PUMP Act, which passed on December 29th of last year, will significantly impact the health and economic security within communities, especially those communities of color that are impacted by not having enough resources or being underfunded, or just having that historic experience with racism and sexism. And so by providing a clear affirmative right to request and receive reasonable accommodations before, during, and after pregnancy for working women, these federal policies really develop more equitable workplaces, and they encourage workers to communicate their health needs to their employer without facing retaliation. And so I just want to say lastly that we did find A Better Balance and Black Mamas Matter Alliance last year. We found in our report, which focused on centering the experiences of Black mamas in the workplace, that some Black mothers, they don't feel comfortable in their work environment to mention their need for accommodations in order to take care of themselves, because they do fear retaliation or being shamed because they're pregnant. And so we really should continue to think about how can workplace policies promote health equity and health outside of just the general healthcare system.
Yeah, thank you so much, Clark and Cameron, both of you. I just to I'm thinking about what you said, how current workplace rules actually, I think you used the term, create a chilling effect, but really create the conditions for negative outcomes, and how we start to shift that focus and locus of responsibility, shift the system, not to blame the individual, but really to find those systemic responses. So thanks so much for sharing that. And Charlotte, I'll hand it over to you now.
Thank you. It's such powerful framing for this conversation. I wanted to talk a little bit about the laws that EEOC enforces, which protects a pregnant worker from harassment or discrimination, including in hiring, firing, pay, job assignments, and promotions, as well as benefits. And they can also provide workplace accommodations for pregnant workers. More importantly, and as you've heard earlier, the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, which goes into effect on June 27th of this year, will help employees and applicants with limitations related to pregnancy, childbirth, or related medical conditions to keep working and keep receiving that income, even if they need reasonable modifications to their jobs, such as, a modification so they won't have to lift heavy boxes when they're pregnant, as was mentioned earlier. So 2 other laws that the EEOC enforces, Title VII and the Americans with Disabilities Act, also provide certain accommodations for pregnant workers in particular circumstances. So a reasonable accommodation is just our way of describing some change in the workplace or in the way things are usually done that enables the employee to perform their job while also not having any undue hardship. And some ways these things are sort of customarily done that lets them sort of have a different approach. So let me give you some examples to make it a bit clearer. Though they can vary by the type of employee, the specific job, and the particular needs. So that includes maybe you need to normally would stand during your job, you need a stool to sit down, or additional break time, more flexible hours, or even reassignment to light duty so that there's not heavy lifting or those kinds of physical obligations during the pregnancy. So with that, Cameron, can you talk to us about why workplace accommodations and protections against pregnancy discrimination are so important for Black mothers?
Sure. And just to take a step back as well, I think, we first saw great progress for pregnant workers when Congress passed the Pregnancy Discrimination in 1978, which was a law that did protect working women from pregnancy discrimination and harassment. But since then, at A Better Balance, we have heard from thousands of pregnant women that were routinely fired or forced off the job when they made requests for workplace accommodations to maintain a healthy pregnancy. And so I just do want to share that, ABB community advocates like Natasha Jackson know this all too well when her dreams were dashed after for owning a home when she was denied accommodations while she was pregnant. And Natasha was the highest ranking account executive. She was the only female employee at a Rent-A-Center store, and she was forced to take unpaid leave after requesting accommodations to avoid occasional heavy lifting. And eventually she was terminated when her job refused to accommodate her pregnancy. And when she testified in front of the South Carolina legislature, Natasha shared that her husband and I had just made a down payment on her house and were about to close the deal when she was forced on the unpaid leave. And without that income, they were forced to back out of that contract, and she was no longer able to support her family. And advocates like Natasha, who were able to share their experience, led the charge with us to Congress and to other, states that really went on to pass these pregnant worker fairness laws. And she was actually able to speak alongside President Biden in the White House when the law did pass. But like you mentioned, these medically necessary workplace accommodations can include, but are not limited to, allowing for rest breaks or bathroom breaks, limits on lifting, having space and time to express breast milk or pump, and then also accommodations like teleworking and time off to recover from childbirth or postpartum depression. And pregnancy itself is not an indefinite period of time. So many of these accommodations require no cost and are actually reasonable to provide. But receiving these timely accommodations on the job is important for the economic security and the health of workers, especially for Black mothers who face a maternal mortality rate of over 3 times that of white women. And addressing barriers to access these accommodations, such as requiring doctor's notes for all accommodations, especially when many workers may lack critical access to adequate health care, is important to consider. 30 states and 5 cities have passed similar state law PWFAs, and many have not required doctor's notes due to this important consideration. So we want to make sure that working women are connected to the workforce, and they simply cannot go without these accommodations. They can't afford to be forced on the unpaid leave. And this problem really does affect Black women and low-wage workers who, as I said before, due to structural racism, are placed in jobs that may not qualify for FMLA to protect their jobs, or are less likely to find that replacement income or have benefits to temporary disability insurance. So accommodations can really be a saving grace for many workers. And I just want to say that, One Health Impact Assessment from 2019 found that accommodating pregnant workers upon their request is critical for reducing poor health outcomes like low birth weight, birth defects, dehydration, mastitis, and preeclampsia. And so it's important to continue to trust Black mothers and workers as they request these reasonable accommodations to maintain a healthy pregnancy, and to provide those legal supports and strong implementation for workers when they do face retaliation or discrimination in the workplace. And I'll pass it over to Clark as well, or sorry, to Megan.
Workplace accommodations are important for Black women because they add a layer of protection from their much needed employment. There's essentially and historically, there's been a lack of value placed on the work that Black women have contributed. And so this just gives you some protection. We've already talked a little bit about and provided, there's been some good explanation of how the EEOC does things to protect and allows people some kind of redress in the event that they have been discriminated against. So this provides, again, an opportunity for folks to have some recourse in the event that they essentially are shifted out of their job simply because they've decided that they are going to start a family. We talked about various reasons why it's so important, to ensure that Black mothers have access and protections to make sure that they can maintain their livelihood and contributions. I'm actually looking in the chat and I see some folks providing great examples of how, there have been concerns. The person didn't really even know where to turn to. So I'm just really glad that there are opportunities for folks to protect their jobs and information being shared here so that people know, what their options are as it relates to discrimination.
Thank you. And I'm watching the chat as well. And some of the questions about how to get through the EEOC process and also concerns about retaliation are things that we're very focused on and planning to that end, really do a lot of education with employers about their obligations as well as with employees to hope that we can prevent as much as possible. And therefore, when it is, necessary to bring a complaint, there will be, it'll only be those complaints that cannot be resolved otherwise. So you'll be hearing a lot from us around, as we get ready for enforcement under the Pregnant Workers Affairs Act, around how to get through that EEOC process and what individuals' rights are. So thank you both for those insights. And I'd love to bring Jessica back into the conversation for her next question.
Thank you, Chair Burrows. And as Cameron just mentioned, I just want to piggyback on something that she was just talking about, which is she mentioned FMLA. And for those who are not familiar, it is actually the 30th anniversary of the Family Medical Leave Act this year. What the FMLA, as for those of you who do know, it was landmark legislation that has helped millions of workers balance work and family. And as we're celebrating FMLA this year, we also acknowledge some of its challenges. And when we think about FMLA, we think about sort of three things that we want to continue to focus on, and it is so relevant to the conversation that we're having today. One is awareness about what your rights are under the FMLA. Two is about reducing stigma and recognizing that there are cultural, economic, and other barriers, many of which we've talked about today, to really wanting to take or even acknowledging that you may need FMLA leave. And then there also is access, which is a lot of what we're talking about too in terms of low-wage workers not being able to afford to take unpaid protected leave. That said, FMLA is part of the framework that we have in order to protect pregnant workers in this country. And it's really important that workers feel empowered to take the leave to support their own well-being and the well-being of their families. And so for expectant moms specifically, and so we're thinking about during pregnancy, FMLA allows expectant moms to take leave from work to receive prenatal care. Saw in the chat, somebody was like, their family member was not able to take FMLA leave for prenatal care. And so if that happens, please call the Wage and Hour Division. I'm going to give you the phone number right now, but we'll give it to you later too. Call us at 1-800-4-US-WAGE, which is 1-866-4-US-WAGE, which is 866-487-9243. We do have 200 offices across the country, and we do enforce access to FMLA leave. But again, so you can take FMLA for prenatal care, and then you can also take it for necessary care if there are certain risks are presented during pregnancy. And so sort of thinking about that time in a new parent's life, what's important? Why is it important to have access to workplace leave during pregnancy? And particularly, why is it so important for Black mothers? And I'm going to ask Clark first, if you don't mind.
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. Again, this is Clark Wheeler from Black Mamas Matter Alliance speaking. I think a lot of what Megan and Cameron mentioned about the importance of workplace accommodations and protections during pregnancy broadly also applies to the importance of workplace leave for Black mothers. So when Black pregnant workers must continue working without leave, it means they are either forced to keep working, sometimes at the risk of pregnancy loss, excessive bleeding, and other serious health consequences, or they are forced off the job without an income during a time when they likely need it the most. Being denied workplace leave may mean that Black pregnant workers do not have the time or income to address pregnancy complications, receive mental and behavioral health support, or care for chronic illnesses. So it's really serious. And while workplace accommodations, again, such as reducing heavy lifting, bending, or excessive standing, are critically important, workplace leave is another essential component of workplace protections during pregnancy for Black women and birthing people. So they work together. As Cameron mentioned earlier, I just want to circle back to this. In 2021, Black Mamas Matter Alliance collaborated with the Better Balance to invite Black birth workers and organizational leaders in our alliance from 9 states to a virtual listening session to hear about their experiences working with Black pregnant and postpartum people who were navigating all these different issues in the workplace while being pregnant. And the participants in the listening session offered a number of insights, including all the ways that being denied pregnancy accommodations and leave broadly negatively impacted their physical, emotional, and mental health, as well as their economic stability. Participants also shared clients' experiences with just hostile work environments generally, such as being let go or feeling forced to quit, the need for paid sick time, for paid family medical leave, and many more issues. So, taken together, I just wanted to circle back to this listening session because it really highlighted some of the ways that Black pregnant and postpartum workers are suffering both economic hardship and negative health outcomes due to both being denied workplace accommodations and protections, as well as workplace leave. And so now I'll pass it over to Cameron to also respond.
And I will say too that for many who may not be eligible for FMLA leave, whether because they are a part-time worker or they haven't worked at their job for just a year quite yet, they can still request an accommodation such as leave under the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act when that does go into effect on June 27th. And many states already have implemented a statewide version of the PWFA, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later as well. But workplace leave during pregnancy is super important for Black mothers because it provides time off to attend vital prenatal appointments so that you may check on your health or your baby's health. And many low-wage workers often do need that time off to attend those prenatal visits, but are unfortunately punished by either accruing attendance points or absence points, which can eventually lead to their own termination. And we've heard from countless numbers of workers on our helpline that they are forced to choose between their job and their pregnancy. And often, if they are forced off the job, they have difficulty regaining new employment during their pregnancy. So just to kind of explain another couple of reasonable accommodations the PWFA provides, it gives time off to attend fertility treatments, prenatal appointments, as well as recovery from childbirth or recovery from postpartum medical conditions like postpartum depression. And these are all forms of reasonable accommodations under the law, and we do have resources on our abetterbalance.org website that gives state by state information, which I'll be happy to share the link in the chat. But along with the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act and the PUMP Act, it's also important to consider that not many workers can afford to take unpaid leave for 12 weeks or 6 to 8 weeks. And so when we think about ways to really increase equity in the workplace, we also have to consider providing greater access to flexible scheduling, paid leave, and paid sick time as well.
No, you absolutely, the access question is real in terms of being able to take unpaid leave, which is provided for under the FMLA leave. I will also just flag, based on the comments, is that we also do have strong FMLA anti-retaliation provisions. And so I know that that's one of the challenges is a fear of taking the leave, in addition to maybe not being able to afford taking the leave. And so I want to just reiterate too that that the Wage and Hour Division will also protect workers from retaliation for asking about their wages or asking about other labor standards, but also for asking about access to FMLA leave. So with that, again, some of these challenges are very, very real. And I want to turn it back over to Wendy to sort of talk a little bit even more about the experiences of Black women when they're pregnant in the workplace.
So thanks. This is Wendy again. We'll just keep building on that. And I finally tuned into the chat as well and see a lot of talk in there about policies like paid leave and paid sick days, and a couple of folks chiming in about what actions states have taken to augment the FMLA that Jessica has been talking about. So I might figure out a way to chat in a resource that we have on the Women's Bureau's page about state efforts to really go above and beyond the baseline of the FMLA. So just want to come back. I also saw another question in the chat about, or someone's reflection actually, of just how over time, as a worker, as an employee, you might become accustomed to just experiencing discrimination so often that you sort of lose touch with what your rights may be. And so keep building, and maybe Megan will go to you first, but keep building on what are some of those promising either practices or policies in the workplace that can really specifically help improve Black maternal health outcomes.
Thank you. I've noted the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. We've talked a great deal about it. Basically, it provides reasonable accommodations to workers, no limitations related to pregnancy, childbirth, or related medical conditions. And I like that it's expansive and it gives some flexibility. I also think it's really important that it makes clear that it doesn't replace any state or federal or local laws that are more protective of the pregnant person, because of course we want to make sure that we are doing as much as we can to protect folks, particularly at that time, protecting their jobs. Also, the Pump Act, it builds in break time, and it also provides folks with the opportunity to have the time, have a designated place to express milk in the event that they need to. And it makes clear that it shouldn't be a bathroom. This one is particularly impactful, I think, because the law closed the gaps on some loopholes that essentially bypassed some folks, and they weren't allowed to take advantage, which, being that the law has been is available to folks. It's included approximately a million Black women. So those are some that I think are impactful right now.
And if I can, I'll just piggyback to say that with the PWFA, that was after 15 years of advocacy, and it couldn't have been done without workers sharing their experiences, advocates coming together from the South, to national organizations like Black Mamas Matter Alliance and NBEC. And so we really have continued to work on outreach and education efforts now that this law will be in effect on June 27th, so that pregnant workers and postpartum workers know about their rights. And so, this also does cover mental conditions as well as physical conditions related to your pregnancy, childbirth, or related medical conditions. And it's important to know that with workers and needing space and time to pump, that there are additional protections under the Pump Act, and that does expand remedies for workers beyond, filing a complaint in the Department of Labor, but also expanding to include different types of remedies and, making sure that over 9 million workers are now covered. So if you are a nurse or a teacher or a farm worker or another group of individuals that was previously excluded under the Federal Break Time for Nursing Mothers Act, you are now included under the PUMP Act, and that went into effect once the law was enacted. But we will actually see updated remedies and enforcement provisions within the next couple of weeks later in April with the PUMP Act. And I think we are continuing to advocate for more workplace policies so that we can really improve Black maternal health outcomes in this country.
Thanks so much, both of you. And Cameron, I'm sticking with your point, just of the power of workers organizing for change, and not just for actual new coverage and protections, but then to actually know your rights and be able to benefit from them. So thanks for that last point there. And Jessica, I think I hand it back to you now.
Thanks. Well, I just really want to pick up on the PUMP Act conversation that we were just having, because I just think that that's really important for us to continue to think about. And so I'm gonna skip to the PUMP Act question just because I think we've already sort of talked about that. Because the Wage and Hour Division is actually responsible for enforcing that. And so many parents choose to breastfeed, but as we know, Black mothers are disproportionately experience barriers to breastfeeding. And I want to just reiterate on the break time and the private space. I know I'm doing this out of order, so I hope my folks don't get confused on this, but Cameron, I just was hoping that you had already sort of talked about what the PUMP Act included. And so I just wanted to make sure that we close the loop on the PUMP Act pieces, so that we have another conversation about what those include. And then also, because the Wage and Hour Division is responsible for enforcing those, and not just, so just for context, the break time for nursing mothers has been around for about 10 years, and we've been enforcing that law for a long time. But to your point, the PUMP Act actually increases the remedies that are available when violations occur, but it also expands coverage significantly to 9 million more women. And so I just don't want to miss the opportunity to talk a little bit more about PUMP Act. And so I'm messing with the system. I'm sorry, friends. But Cameron, I just wanted to see if there was anything else you wanted to add about the PUMP Act, and then maybe Megan and then Clark, you could talk a little bit about the PUMP Act as well.
Sure, and I'll just say that, the PUMP Act does cover all employers of any size, regardless of their size. And, there are some exceptions for businesses that may have less than 50 employees. But what we've seen is that having adequate space that is not a bathroom, that's free from intrusion, is really critical to improving the retention and initiation rates of Black mothers as they choose to continue to breastfeed and nurture their baby. And, we've seen that oftentimes having less time, an inflexible schedule to pump can really be a critical barrier for encouraging mothers to continue to provide those nutrients for their child. But they've also seen their own health benefits from breastfeeding, as we see that bonding time increases positivity and decreases the likelihood of having postpartum depression, and also decreases the likelihood of having conditions like mastitis. So, we really want to encourage workers to use the PUMP Act and even the PWFA if they are not covered by the PUMP Act, to ensure that they are facing, more positive health impacts, not just, the negative impacts by their employers or their businesses.
Thanks so much, Cameron. And again, Megan, did you want to say a little bit about the PUMP Act as well?
Actually, I don't. I think she covered it, but thank you.
Okay, perfect. Great. And Clark, anything you want to add about PUMP Act?
Sure. I mean, I think Cameron did cover it really well. I'll just add, when we think about sort of broader disparities in breastfeeding and chest feeding, Black Mamas Matter Alliance is actually composed of a lot of lactation support providers, birth workers, advocates, professionals who work directly with those seeking breastfeeding, chest feeding, and infant feeding supports. And across the board, our alliance partners know that there are really long-standing inequities in human milk feeding and infant formula access for Black women and birthing people, as well as a lot of these acute instances, but these have been long-standing issues. I would also just plug actually that it's related to the Pump Act, but if you're interested, if folks in the audience are interested in learning about this broader issue, especially how it relates to Black women and birthing people, Black Mamas Matter Alliance does have a webinar on this topic. It's called Changing the Narrative Series Black Breastfeeding Week. It can be accessed on our YouTube page. And it can really just offer some historical and present day context for how the Pump Act can really work to support people in the workplace, and how it addresses some of these long-standing inequities in breastfeeding and chest feeding. And the only other thing I would actually add is that in terms of tying it back to the earlier question around how workplace protections fit into the constellation of social determinants of health, infant feeding, a lot of our alliance partners say this, that infant feeding is a food access issue. So the Pump Act is not only sort of a workplace policy, just focused on like one specific area of our lives. It's also a policy that can support self-determination and food sovereignty for Black pregnant and postpartum workers. So it's just another way to think about it. And I just encourage people to learn more about the broader context of this issue. But yeah, I'll pass it back to you, Jessica.
Thanks, Clark, and I appreciate that. And again, thank you for the audible on the Pump Act. I just felt like it was an opportunity for us to discuss that really, really important issue. But let's go back up a little bit and talk a little bit about, so we've talked a little bit about pregnancy, and we've talked about the experience of particularly low wage vulnerable Black women in the economy, and then we've talked a little bit about pregnancy. We skipped to breastfeeding, but there's that piece in the middle, which is, how about taking leave for birth and bonding? And, again, under FMLA leave, there's a place for us to, for the Wage and Hour Division to really ensure that workers have access to bond with their new child. But again, I think this is very similar to the leave needed for prenatal care. Anything else you want to add? I'm going to go to Cameron first. Anything else you want to add about sort of FMLA for birth and bonding to augment the conversation about sort of FMLA leave for prenatal care?
Yeah, I'll just say quickly that with this recent celebration of the FMLA, the Family and Medical Leave Act, this past February, it has been 30 years of providing critical protections for many workers who are eligible. And that job protected time off for workers can be used to care for themselves, for a new child, or a seriously ill child, and also for their spouse or their parent. And we have seen that this law has helped millions of workers access that time off that wasn't provided prior to this law to care for themselves and to keep their health insurance through their employer. If their employer provides health insurance benefits for them, they can also, have the reassurance that they are going to be able to return to their job after taking this leave, because we have seen that fear of losing their job is one of the most common reasons why employees cite they do not take the leave. And so having that right to reinstatement is really important. And the 12 weeks can really be critical for Black mothers as they're recovering from childbirth and bonding with their new baby. We've seen research that has shown that taking too little leave, particularly less than 8 weeks, is associated with reduced postpartum health. And so having access to that bank of time that can be used either on a reduced schedule or continuously for birth and bonding is really critical to helping those Black mothers who are eligible in the future.
Clark, did you want to add anything about birth and bonding leave?
Sure, I'll just reiterate. I mean, the bonding and postpartum period is critically important for Black mothers' health and well-being, as well as infant health and well-being. And just, reiterate that more than half of maternal deaths actually occur in the postpartum period. And, while policies like postpartum Medicaid coverage for a year are essential to improving health outcomes, workplace policies play a major role too. And it's just important for Black women and birthing people to be able to rest, access postpartum care, and engage in all the other aspects of postpartum period without associated fear and stress of losing their job and their livelihood. So I think a lot of what we've said so far, just reiterating the importance of the birth and bonding period, and not just limiting folks' experiences to the actual pregnancy period. So, and I'll pass it back to you, Jessica.
Great. No, I think that's exactly right, Clark, and thanks, Cameron, for sort of thinking about, you know, the worker brings themselves to work every day, and that means that they bring their whole selves to work every day. And how do we think about supporting, as well as, you know, acknowledging that we are really engaged in a larger community experience every single day when we go to work, and that includes families. So thank you for that conversation. Charlotte, I'm going to turn it back to you and to keep us moving here. Thank you.
All right, thank you. You know, a worker's right to reasonable accommodations really doesn't end just because the pregnancy has ended. I want to make sure that that's clear. Both the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act continue to apply postpartum. And I did see someone note in the chat that pregnancy itself is not a disability under the ADA, but certain conditions like high blood pressure or something along those lines would be, if even if it's, you know, the result of a pregnancy. But more importantly, because the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, which again goes into effect at the end of June 27th, provides for accommodations for known limitations that might arise out of pregnancy, out of childbirth, or related medical conditions that can include leave for recovery from childbirth. And some of those medical conditions that occur after pregnancy, like postpartum depression, for instance, could also be disabilities under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So, Megan, how will the availability of these new accommodations rights after birth assist new parents?
I think it'll give parents a new sense of peace of mind. They'll be comforted by the fact that their job is protected while they spend time adjusting to being a new parent, bonding with their new child. That said, I think it's even more important now to make sure that people know that these protections have been expanded and are accessible to them, and have good guidance on basically process and procedure, who they need to reach out to within their working environment, and acknowledge that they're not going to be retaliated for getting the information for these types of accommodations that are available to them.
Thank you. Go ahead.
And I'll just say too that the federal PWFA, the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act that passed last year and goes into effect on June 27th, will fill a gap for about 3 million uncovered workers who were previously not covered under FMLA. So with these new accommodations for time off to recover from childbirth, or to have to recover from a postpartum condition, it really will, you know, allow for new parents to continue to advocate for their health and take the time off they need, and prevent, you know, serious illnesses from occurring. But we also have seen that the availability of lactation accommodations will, you know, help to encourage workers to talk to their doula, to talk to their lactation specialist, and continue to have positive health outcomes, you know, and we're hopeful that this will be able to address, you know, some of the crises we see with the Black maternal health crisis in the future.
Thank you. And those are such important observations. I really appreciate it. And someone in the chat had asked about lactation and whether or not there could be accommodations for that as a medical condition. The answer is yes. So that is, I just wanted to be responsive to that before I turned it back over to Wendy. Go ahead.
Thanks, Charlotte. This is really a great conversation. I'm forgetting now, I'm losing track of who said this earlier, but still thinking about the point you were making. You know, even if you know your rights in terms of access to FMLA for birth and bonding, you know, one of the biggest barriers actually to taking advantage of the FMLA is the lack of pay. It's the fact that it's unpaid. So I want to come back around and Cameron, maybe ask you to start. talk a little bit about the disparities in access both to the FMLA, but also to access to paid leave and how that impacts Black mothers. And I found the link, and I'll chat it in now while I hand the mic over to you, Cameron, to the microsite that the Women's Bureau put together on state level paid leave laws, since somebody had posed that in the chat earlier.
Sure thing. And the disparities in access to FMLA and paid leave in this country essentially force many Black mothers to choose their work over caring for their health. It's not a choice at all because many cannot afford to go without pay, and often women will end up losing their jobs if they do take leave because that leave can be unprotected without job protection and pay. And so currently, there is no federal paid leave law, but we have seen growing momentum on the state level as 11 states have had their own paid leave programs created. And frighteningly enough, only 38% of low wage workers in the US are eligible for unpaid FMLA. So, what we've just talking about unpaid leave first, what we've seen is many are not able to take off that unpaid time. And nearly a quarter of Black women said they couldn't take FMLA because they couldn't afford the lost income. So even if they are eligible for FMLA, they are not taking the full 12 weeks because it is unpaid. And this is research from the Department of Labor that's really given us this keen insight. And what that looks like is many Black mothers and new mothers in the US will return to work within less than 2 weeks. Research has shown that about 25% of new US mothers return to work within less than 2 weeks after giving birth. And research, not only does that show that they are not fully recovered from healing, they may still be susceptible to serious illness, but they're also tackling the stress that is in the workplace. Whether they feel that they are being shamed for being new parents, or they are not as dedicated to the job, or they are facing discrimination while they are also trying to recover from their health. Now, in terms of paid leave, research from the Department of Labor shows that Black women have disproportionately less access to paid leave when they are compared to white and Asian women, and that they are more likely to be working in a job that has some form of unpaid leave, whether that be through their employer's own policies or federally mandated through the FMLA. But through our work at A Better Balance, we've seen that families who have access to paid leave are healthier, they are more economically secure, and generally we can associate paid leave with better physical and mental health for mothers and fathers, including a lower risk of postpartum depression for mothers, and a positive reinforcement of bonding when fathers take paternity leave as well, and care for their children through that bonding time. Paid leave can help address existing maternal and infant health disparities, especially for Black women who are significantly more likely to die in childbirth or experience serious health complications than white women. And it can also significantly impact women's ability to stay attached and thrive in the workforce. And so we are really part of our mission is to help advance policies in the workplace through state and federal advocacy. And so we definitely, if you're interested in joining our efforts or learning more about paid leave programs across the country, definitely encourage you to visit our website and the Department of Labor's website for more information.
And I can follow up on what Cameron said by just adding that these disparities in FMLA and paid leave further exacerbate disparities in maternal health, but they also underscore the ways that intersectional oppression operates, just related to what I was speaking about in the beginning. Many of the reasons that Black women and birthing people are disproportionately harmed by the maternal health crisis are the same reasons that they are disproportionately underpaid, overworked, and prevented from taking leaves. So the intersectional oppressions that Black mothers face really compound each other and have serious consequences for Black maternal health. And so just wanted to showcase the ways that the issue of disparities in FMLA can really highlight what intersectional oppression looks like for Black women and birthing people.
Yeah, That's such a critical point, Clark. Thank you for that. I want to, I'll hold the mic for a second and maybe do a follow-up because I saw a very compelling comment in the chat, Cameron, to what you were saying about how folks often are returning much too soon. And the reaction in the chat was, wow, did you say less than 2 weeks folks are returning? So just in thinking a little bit more about, you know, that return to work and really importantly, things like access to pumping and the right to pump. Maybe Cameron, if you want to build a little bit, are there differences in the rates at which Black women are returning to work after giving birth? And how does that then impact maternal health?
Sure. And I'll say too that recent research has shown that Black women typically return to work on average 2 weeks earlier than women from other racial and ethnic groups. And although with the FMLA, you can use your PTO or accrued vacation or annual sick time while you're on leave, much of that time may be exhausted within the first few weeks if you have any accrual at all. If you're working in a job that is low paying or low wage earning, they may not even have a PTO policy on board. So for many Black mothers, for Black women and Black birthing people, it's simply not an option to go the full weeks without that pay because they are honestly, you know, the co-breadwinners or the primary breadwinners for their family. So what can be a joyous time for any family when welcoming a new child really does become overshadowed by that stress and that anxiety of how to really navigate the return to work while they're still bonding with their baby. And additionally, we do see that Black women are less likely to have those flexible hours because they are more often working in jobs without breastfeeding protections. But we are happy to see that the Pump Act can fill in those gaps that were in the federal break time for nursing mothers law. And with the help of community-based organizations, with lactation specialists and healthcare providers and employers, we can try to bridge those gaps with the knowledge. But additionally, Wendy, we do see that moms who return to work within the 12 weeks of giving birth are less likely to breastfeed. And when they do breastfeed, it can be for less time than those who do stay home for longer. And so we hear from many moms, from many new moms, the frustration with trying to breastfeed and chest feed, but having that frustration of their job not being supportive, which can really spur, you know, postpartum depression and anxiety, but they're unsure of how to talk about their health needs with their employer without being fired or, you know, retaliated against for bringing it up because they're being compared to other workers. And so postpartum depression does affect 1 in 8 women, but the risk is 1.6 times higher for Black women than white women, studies have shown. And Black women are less likely to receive help due to the various factors, including financial barriers, mental health stigma, structural racism, and inadequate healthcare. So we really do have to look at how do structural systems like the workplace impact Black women's ability to advocate for themselves and take care of their health. It's not just an individual basis anymore. We have to look at these as societal factors and socioeconomic determinants of health.
Shocking, shocking statistics. Cameron, thank you for sharing them. Hard as they are. Megan, you want to jump in? Go ahead.
Sure. I echo much of what Cameron has already said. Black women have consistently returned to work more quickly than other women, likely because of the types of job they have, the pressure to bring money into to support the family and the new baby, lack of knowledge of the protections that are assessed to them, and simply oftentimes are intimidated by employers that don't, you know, adhere to the worker protections. I think only to drive it home, I just thought of an example when I was in college. One of the professors was expecting, she had the child and she was back before the end of the semester. And I literally did a double take because I could not believe that she was actually back. And so I think, you know, and she was a Black woman, had twins at the time. And so I just think it's really important to kind of share some of those lived experiences, provide some examples and share some of these concerns as it relates to the possibility of needing those funds as that have been expressed, particularly for mothers that are breadwinners of the families or single parents.
Yeah, thank you both. All three of you, actually, since I got to ask 2 questions there. But I also just really appreciate the blending of both personal story and hard, cold data that really show the disparity. It sort of backed all the way to the top of our conversation, really takes it out of the personal. Yes, many of us have experienced these things on the job, but they are not our individual misgivings or failures. It's actually systemic. So thanks for bringing both into the conversation and really keeping the focus on the systemic changes that have been made and that are still needed. Charlotte, handing it over to you.
Thank you. And I could not agree more. I want to talk about the overall caregiver role because, parents' role as caregivers sometimes intersects. So often actually intersects with the workplace. And EEOC has found that both employers and employees need to be reminded that there are protections under the anti-discrimination laws for caregivers. And in addition to the laws that we've already discussed, the EEOC enforces the laws that protect against discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, including, of course, pregnancy, but also sexual orientation, gender identity, as well as national origin, age, if you're 40 or older, disability, association with an individual who has a disability, or genetic information. So that's a lot of bases, but at essence, the idea is that an employer cannot discriminate against applicants or employees who have caregiving responsibilities based on stereotypes or a protected characteristic or intersection of those characteristics. So while caregiver status itself is not standing alone a protected status, sometimes unlawful discrimination occurs because employers are acting on assumptions or stereotypes about what employees can do if they have caregiving responsibilities. So Clark, let's talk about some of the obstacles that Black women face when returning to work with new caregiving responsibilities.
Sure. Thank you so much for that question. Again, this is Clark Wheeler from Black Mamas Matter Alliance. So when Black women and birthing people return to work with new caregiving responsibilities, they may face obstacles such as lack of flexibility in their hours, lack of paid sick leave, lack of lactation space, and other barriers that we've discussed today. I just want to circle back again to the listening session that Black Mamas Matter Alliance did with A Better Balance a couple years ago. So some of the participants in the listening session spoke to this issue directly. One participant told a story about a Black mother who had established breastfeeding with her daughter, and when she returned to work, she was able to continue breastfeeding initially, but over time, she was forced to quit breastfeeding because she couldn't get the accommodation she needed consistently honored by her manager. And although she elevated the issue to her human resources department, they left it to her manager's discretion. Another participant said that in her work, she has heard stories of mothers not being able to go to their own postpartum doctor appointments or not being able to take their children to doctor's appointments because they were concerned that they had already spent all of their sick leave. And these stories highlight a couple of the ways that even after Black women and birthing people have navigated pregnancy in their workplaces, and we've heard of all the different barriers to accommodations and leave that one experiences during pregnancy, that when they return with a new caregiving responsibility, they often have to fight new battles and navigate new workplace policies in the postpartum period. And even beforehand, they may have a fear that they will experience discrimination, stereotyping, and other just forms of workplace mistreatment due to these responsibilities because of what they've seen and what they've heard and lived experiences of people in their communities. So as we know, it's just important for workplace policies to not only honor workers during pregnancy, but also the new caregiving responsibilities they may have with things like flexible hours, paid sick leave, lactation space, and also just a culture that supports rather than stigmatizes or stereotypes caregiving responsibilities. And I'll pass it over to Cameron.
Thanks, Clark. And I'll just quickly say that, we learned a lot of lessons from the pandemic, and we should not forget those lessons, even though, for some, arguably, we may be in or still out of a pandemic. And 2.1 million women were pushed out of the workforce, and Black and Latinx mothers experienced this hit the hardest at about 41%. And so when we talk about returning to work, I think a lot of times we can instantly think of mothers in the workplace, but there are also non nuclear families. We are caring for our grandparents, we are caring for our parents and cousins. And so how can we really make the workplace equitable by accounting for, flexible schedules and paid family and medical leave and paid sick time, so that we're also able to care for ourselves while we're caring for multiple family members. But in terms of, Black women and new mothers entering the workplace with new caregiving responsibilities, we've seen that many of them do face inflexible schedules. They are receiving pushback, like Clark mentioned, from what we've seen in our report, when they do address their needs or raise concerns. And we're also seeing that they're being passed up for promotions or growth opportunities due to that systemic bias. And we're still seeing heightened rates of mental and physical stress with new mothers who come back to the workplace.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing those insights. It's sobering, and I think the last thing I would say about that is, often people will have obligations for maybe older relatives as well, that they're balancing with their child-giving obligations, and then sort of caught in the middle. And so I want to emphasize again it's caregiving. And stereotypes about caregiving and can impact both of those kinds of obligations, whether it's a caregiver for someone who has a disability or an older relative, and stereotypes about that association, or if it's due to childcare. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it over to Jessica to ask our last question. You have the last word, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. And again, I'm actually happy to turn it right back over to you. I think we've had an amazing conversation today about the sort of how folks embrace being Black women and Black workers and Black moms across the economy. And I think it's really helpful. We talked already a little bit about the Pump Act and what some of the things that implies. So I'm really grateful, and I think you're going to let everybody have the last word. So I won't take the last word. I just want to thank everybody for joining us today and making sure that this is something that's top of mind. And yeah, I'll turn it back over to you, Charlotte.
All right, terrific. Well, as we draw to the close of this discussion, at least today's part of it, I wanted to give everyone a chance to provide some short last parting thoughts for our audience. And for those of you in the audience, we will be sending everyone who registered for today's event a follow-up email, so that you will have available to you both a link to the recording of today's conversation, as well as additional resources. I saw some folks ask about that in the chat. And with that, I'll turn to Clark to kick us off with your final thoughts.
Thank you so much. Again, this is Clark Wheeler from Black Mamas Matter Alliance. So thank you so much to the event organizers, panelists, and audience members for coming together to have this really important conversation. I highly encourage audience members to continue to engage with Black Maternal Health Week programming from today through April 17th to engage with issues like the one we spoke about today, as well as intersecting issues around Black maternal health. So make sure to visit blackmamasmatter.org/BMHW for a full list of national BMMA hosted events, as well as events in your city or state hosted by our alliance partners who are doing this work on the ground across the country. Also tomorrow, Black Mamas Matter Alliance is launching its new comprehensive policy agenda. at our virtual Policy Day rally. And so we encourage people to register for the event and learn about our policy recommendations, including those related to workplace protections for Black women and birthing people. And I'll pass it over to Cameron. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, Clark. And just want to say again, thank you all for taking the time out of your day to really, learn about these two laws and participate in this discussion. It's such an important topic to me and to everyone here on this panel. And just want to say that the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act and the PUMP Act were incredible steps for supporting Black mothers in the workplace, but there is much more work to be done that is still being done. And it really is even more important that we all work together as agencies, advocates, and other organizations, both in the maternal and child health space and in the labor space, to really support mothers directly as we work, to develop robust education and opportunities. And there's, further implementation and enforcement in the future with the two agencies. So the main goal is, that all mothers, all birthing people have the tools and resources they need to thrive in their motherhood journey. And I'm going to put in the chat, just if you are a worker and you have questions about your workplace rights, you can call our free and confidential legal helpline at 1-833-633-3222, or visit our website to learn more about your rights, and we can help you understand how to navigate the workplace if you're looking to care for yourself or your loved ones. And then we also have some resources on those two laws and what they mean for workers across the country. So really thankful to be here, and I'll pass it over to Megan.
Thanks, Cameron. Folks, happy Black Maternal Health Week. Thanks so much for joining us. Thank you for the invitation. It was certainly my pleasure. Make sure you're sharing this information with folks that you know, particularly folks that you think can use the information or may not be knowledgeable about some of the things that we've shared here. Make sure to follow MBEC at birthequity.org. There will be a host of initiatives that we're working on, as well as our Black Maternal Health Week programming. Thank you. Have a good day.
I just want to echo everybody's thanks one more time and encourage people to check out the resources that we have on the Wage and Hour Division's websites of the U.S. Department of Labor. Again, that's usdol.gov. And just really appreciate everybody's time. I really appreciate Clark and Cameron and Megan, and certainly Chair Burrows and my colleague Wendy. This has been a really, really great day. And again, more to come on all of this. And yes, please share the message. Wendy?
Yes, echoing much. I just reflecting on how multifaceted the conversation has been, from, conditions of work, to the full range of reasonable accommodations, and then needing access to leave for birth and bonding, and then the return to work, and really therefore how the range of responses that are needed to be truly inclusive and equitable, policy, practice, and then, as many people said in the chat, the distance that we still have to go to get that culture change in our workplaces. So appreciating the roles that each of our agencies play, but also really your work at the National Birth Equity Collaborative, at A Better Balance, and also at Black Mamas Matters Alliance. Thank you so much. Charlotte.
Well, thank you. I'm so inspired by this conversation and by all of you and your work. So thank you for that. Today's discussion, I think, really just highlights the importance of those legal protections for pregnant and parenting workers in ensuring the economic security and health of workers and their children. And these protections are so important, but particularly important for Black parents who may face discrimination for both their race and their pregnancy. And so these legal protections, though, we have to remember, are going to be meaningless unless workers are aware of their rights and able to assert them. And so that's why all of these laws that the EEOC enforces, as well as a lot of the Department of Labor's laws, also include protections against retaliation. And at the EEOC, we'll continue to educate workers and employers about those rights and about their responsibilities on the employer side. And when necessary, EEOC will vigorously use our enforcement authority to ensure that workers do not face discrimination and receive the accommodations to which they are entitled under the law. So on behalf of myself, but also Principal Deputy Administrator Lumen and Director Chun Yung, so grateful to everyone and would like to thank you for joining us today. A very special thanks to our colleagues at the EEOC and the Department of Labor who helped prepare for today's event. And most of all, I'd like to thank our distinguished guests for their time and valuable insights. You will be hearing, I think, a lot more from us as we continue to raise awareness about the PUMP Act and, of course, about the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. So with that, thanks again, and I wish you all a terrific afternoon.